All right, everybody. So there's been a couple of requests on the page for me to kind of go over, my materials and my process for developing these Red Fleet ships that have been scratch building. So I'm going to do this as quick as I can. I tried to as organized as I can. So first of all, as you can see, these ships are all base forms that are combinations of wood forms, sprue, beads, and the like. So how do I start? Well, the first thing is I start with blank forms like these. These are combinations of shapes and forms that look like ships for this particular project. And I use a lot of things. Primarily, I use woodcraft forms. These are pretty typical of what you can find in stores like Michael's, Hobby Lobby, or through a couple of online vendors. As you can see here, they can be combined together to form hull texture. This is a juice applesauce pouch cap. This is a wheel. This one right here is a wheel for a toy car. But yeah, it's a matter of combining them in different ways. Other things I use are various caps from like 5-hour energies, soda caps, pieces of candy container. This is a really cool fancy glue stick that can be used, almost as a ship on its own, but the end piece makes a really cool hull or a engine module to butt onto the back of something. If I was to say take it, combine it like this, you can see there's some potential there. When selecting your wood forms, try to go for more basic forms. An odd shape like this is hard to use. It's kind of hard to justify unless you're going to have a really organic, wobbly ship. Focus on pieces that also can be used as end pieces. This is good for the front or a back of a ship. You can see that on this, I've used it with a water bottle cap, a ping pong ball, and two of those butted together to form a nice hull. And on the back of this, I'd probably do some sort of engine treatment. Other things, this has a hole in it, so this is useful for a couple of things. It butts up to a nice end there. As you can see here, it is the end piece on these ships. That's actually this red heavy beam cruiser. It's got a chin-mounted turret, 4 defense lasers around the middle, and then quad nose cannons. Plastic wire is really good for breaking up some of these shapes. A lot of my ships will use a piece of plastic rod wrapped around, and then you can disguise the crude glue point with a turret or a piece of equipment like a sensor pod or something. Most of these are just plastic domes with plastic wire attached. So yes, your junk is good. These are the little spools that come in your dog poo bags for when you're taking the critters for a walk. These were used for clipping pieces of rod for a greenhouse. So those are junk pieces. Now for your detail pieces, beads, thumbtacks are good. You can clip the brad. These are actually brads. You can clip the metal clips off of them, or if you're using balsa, you can stick it right in. But they make good domes. These are one of your biggest friends. These come in all sorts of different sizes. You can get them in sheets. They come down to super tiny details. These little pins are great for ports and sensor domes on some of your lighter ships. And these are all just adhesive-backed materials for scrapbooking. Weird beads. These can make really good engine coils, things like that. Granny canvas. This stuff is really useful too. On a couple of my ships, I use that to do the missile racks on the front. These missile racks are actually just sections of really small granny canvas glued to the flat. So this is probably one of the most specifically purchased modeling bits. This is plastic tube, PVC tube. So really, end pieces, caps like this, domes or flats, this is one of the most useful shapes I've found for a lot of these. This is a bowl. It's actually supposed to be like a little doll bowl. You can see it's got a little lathed lip. That's an extra detail that really adds some nice finish to some of these. On these, I've used them as bow pieces. You can see this one, it's the bow cap. But in other ones, it is the transition from the main hull to the stern piece, and then I've used a piece of plastic tube that I've cut off to do the engine port. Those can be used in a number of different ways. Shorter ships like this, or you can take something like this and say add a cylinder to it like that, and little dome thing, and suddenly you've got like a sapphire shaped hull. And that's the other thing. So weird shapes like this with these pegs, some of these things can actually be drilled with holes or have holes in them, like this one. And so these two parts here don't really make much, but this is a similar part that has a little peg in it. This part here has a little peg in it that goes in here, and that was the basis for this hull. This is that bowl shape plus one of these dome shapes, or excuse me, it's out of frame. This is one of these bowl shapes plus the dome shape with plastic bits. The other thing to remember is caps. So there are two types of caps you'll find out there. They look very similar from the top. This is kind of a domed one. This has got a bit of a flat. And flat parts are really useful for attaching weapons and sensors. But on the other side, they have different connections. This one's got a hole, so it'll fit your pegs. And this one's flat, so it'll glue onto your other flat surfaces. This is an example of using one of these caps with a bead to make a short hull. From that short hull, I was able to add some details and get a little cutter, PT boat shaped thing. But one of those caps plus one of these pegs make a really long destroyer. Some plastic rod out the front makes for good antennas. I do apologize for the shaky camera. I've really got very little material for working with this kind of stuff. So when you're looking at your designs too, it doesn't hurt to piece things together dry before you glue them, and then also to look at them from different directions. So this piece can go either way. I was looking at this. Originally, my plan was to make this cap the back, and I was going to put an engine there and put like one of these dome parts on the front, a smaller dome part on the front or something. But then I got to looking at it, and I'm like, man, if I was really to flip it around and put the engines back here, this gives me a really cool kind of shallow domed front that I could attach some weapons to or sensors to and do kind of just a really, chunky, buff little light cruiser. This is my heavy cruiser. This is my light cruiser. And the other thing to think about too is when you're coming together with pieces, for the big ships, like my battleship here, which you can see I've added a butt end from the pictures I posted, it seemed to terminate real quick. That did make this thing pretty hefty, but considering it's got a big spinal mount gun and a bunch of turrets, it's all armor and power. With your big ships, it's not so much a big deal, but make sure that when you're making your smaller ships that you're going to have multiples of, that you have parts to make multiples. This heavy cruiser, it's really easy. I've got parts, little details on the hull here. These are plastic cuts and sprue cutoffs from just like Warhammer sprue. You can see here, this is just a drink cap. It's a smaller drink cap because that's like a 5-hour energy, whereas here's your typical soda bottle cap. But your soda bottle cap is also good for other stuff as well. So you could do remember one thing I mentioned earlier, this thing has a hole in it, so holes in some of your designs are great when you can't find flat-butted pieces. Like spheres like this are pretty cool, or domes that have flat bits. Sometimes all you've got is maybe a round bead like this, or you don't want to use that whole sphere. So if I take this and I pull out one of my smaller drink caps, I can always put that in there, and then it'll sit flush and you have a little bit more detail. Or with like these ones, you put those together. I'm sorry about that. You can put them together and you can get weird kind of combinations like this where you've just got your hole sticking out. What I've done here is this is one of my spheres tucked into one of those applesauce caps. And then this one is supposed to be like an older style ship, so it's got all sorts of hull pieces on it. Sorry about that. And somebody peeking their head in the garage. So this is supposed to be the Medusa class old battle cruiser, and it looks like I lost a turret just sitting here. Glue is your friend, but these things come apart, but they also go back together. This is called a Medusa because from the front it's got a bunch of radiating turrets. And that spinal mount gun, it would have been the earlier version of this. So, looking at things from different directions, piecing things together. I was talking about sourcing your parts. It's important to make sure you have multiples. This is a really cool little destroyer. I can only make 2 of these though, because the gun on the bottom, this gun turret, is actually sourced from an actual model, and I ended up not having enough models for that. So when I tried to make another ship with a chin gun, I ended up having to cobble it together. And while it's passable, I don't feel it looks quite as good. So it's always helpful to make sure that you have multiple parts, or that you have a way to reproduce your parts. It's really not hard. These are thread spools for my wife's sewing machine. I think this is for her embroidery thread. These things are really cool forms because you take something like this and you put a cap on here. You've got your bridge, and then you could put another cap at the end for your engine. And then if you were to take, say, a bunch of smaller spheres and line them down the way, that could be a tanker or something like that. So one last thing to note, this is a lot of cobbling together to get stuff to go together. Oh, GW paint caps. These things are really cool shapes. And they've got little divots that you could put turrets into, or just put other details into, and they butt onto the end of your ships like that and add a nice tail end. Sort of the same way that the glue stick cap would, or these juice caps, or they do. So another thing to think about is these. These are bags of pre-made, basically wood dolls, peg dolls. And as you can see, this is just a random pull from the bag. But I've easily got, if I was to orient these all the same way, I've easily got, a cruiser, a couple of cruisers, a destroyer, or a frigate and a destroyer, base hulls, and then you can start detailing. And the bag has these basic forms in multiple different shapes, or sizes, I should say. And so you can really play around with that. It's not hard stuff to do. You can hear my dog freaking out. Another thing too is don't work yourself into holes. Like this hull, it's really compact, and I haven't been able to finish this particular ship because I don't like the way that this looks. And you can hear my dog freaking out, but I don't like the way that this looks. And it's just too egg-shaped and too compact. So, but other things too. This is another mistake. I didn't end up having parts to fill this void, so I ended up with a ship. I ran out of ways to terminate the hole on the end of here that were adequate, so I was trying to fill it, and it just didn't really feel right. So dry fitting is certainly important. This one's not bad. This little flat spot is a good place to make a lot of front-facing guns, but the other thing too is, as you can look at this, I've got so many different shapes and forms that I don't have a fleet of reusable ships. I or multiples of a lot of ships. So that's a trap that's easy to get into. I've got a whole bunch of replications of forms like this one and stuff already sitting on my bookshelf behind me, but it's really easy to get sucked down the rabbit hole of creating new hull shapes. It's because it's fun. It just you're fitting together things, and you got the shapes of the different hulls. Right here is a variation of the battleship. There's another variation of the battleship using that ping pong ball. Anyways, battery on my phone's dying, but this is just kind of a quickie thing. Beads. There are square sequins that you can find supposedly out there. Leland Erickson, also known as Black Widow Pilot. I think he buys them all, goes around the world, and then goes on a world tour buying them all because I can never find them. Odd-shaped beads for coils. Cylinders are good. Really important parts are separators, dividers. This is a flat disc, and it's great for breaking up or transitioning between shapes. Same thing with these big wheels. You get a nice hull detail, and when you're building them to add that texture and that complexity, think about alternating hull details. Like this is a prescription bottle cap in the center here, and that gives that nice front to back striation against these wheels that have the side to side, and there's where they fit together kind of provides a seam that'll help with a lot of texture, because these aren't super textured, and a lot of the texturing is going to come out in paint, so don't feel like you have to over detail them. You're not scratch building, excuse me. I mean, you can get super crazy and scratch build stuff like this. This is just layering of plastic card. This is the harder way. This is having the shapes do a lot of your homework for you. Anyways, this is Eli from I See Lead People's my blog. It's old and kind of out of date, but I'm all over the internet. And this is kind of the process for building crazy, Traveler Imperium style ships. Have a good one, guys.